The desert of East Africa does not attack. It waits for bodies to fall behind. Under a cloudless sky, the land stretches outward in muted tones. Dust, stone, and hardened soil, flattened by relentless light. Heat rises steadily from the ground, bending the air and distorting distance. What looks close demands more effort than expected. What appears still is already draining energy. There is no shelter in the open. Shrubs cling low to the earth, their shadows too thin to matter. Trees are scattered and ineffective, offering little more than a change in color against the glare. Wind moves across the surface without cooling it, carrying dust that settles into every crack. Even sound feels absorbed by emptiness. By midday, exposure alone becomes dangerous. Body temperature rises faster than it can stabilize. Moisture evaporates almost instantly. Movement demands energy that cannot be recovered. In this environment, collapse does not arrive. Suddenly it accumulates. Predators understand this terrain well. Lions limit activity to narrow windows at dawn and dusk. Leopards remain hidden, conserving strength rather than wasting it in open pursuit. Many carnivores abandon these regions, entirely drawn toward landscapes where heat does not decide outcomes before claws ever matter. Here the desert is the primary force. Survival is not measured by strength or speed, but by tolerance, how long a body can remain exposed before failure sets in. Endurance erodes minute by minute. Muscles weaken, awareness dulls, even vigilance fades under thermal strain. What persists does so by avoiding visibility. Beneath the surface, conditions change abruptly. Temperature drops, light disappears, air becomes still and insulated from the sun's direct assault. These underground spaces are rare interruptions in an otherwise lethal landscape. Access to them determines whether survival is possible at all. Not every species is permitted entry. Across the plains, signs of life appear briefly, then vanish. Tracks form at dawn and disappear by noon. Feeding marks scar soil that should support nothing. Evidence accumulates without explanation, proof that something continues to endure where survival should be mathematically impossible. This persistence is quiet. It does not rely on confrontation. It depends on timing. In a land where even predators retreat from prolonged exposure, existence belongs to those that know when to disappear, those that can reach reprieve before heat removes the option entirely. Here, survival is never secured. It is only delayed. And whatever endures in this environment does so under a single condition: it cannot afford to hesitate. In this environment, the desert warthog should not exist. Its body offers no clear advantage. Sparse hair leaves thick skin exposed to heat. Its build is compact and low-designed for steady movement rather than escape. There is no camouflage to break its outline against pale soil. No speed capable of outrunning danger once fatigue sets in. Even its tusks, often mistaken for weapons, are primarily tools for feeding, not defense. By desert standards, these traits are liabilities. The desert warthog occupies one of the most vulnerable positions in the ecosystem. It feeds at ground level, dependent on grasses, roots, and tubers that disappear quickly under drought. It cannot browse higher vegetation. It cannot migrate long distances to escape worsening conditions. When resources thin, it remains exposed where others withdraw. Predators do not need complex strategies to target it. Opportunity is enough. A delayed retreat, a misjudged distance, a moment of heat-induced fatigue, any of these can end survival immediately. Yet the species persists in regions where even predators reduce activity. This survival is not driven by strength or endurance. It is driven by avoidance. The desert warthog structures its entire existence around minimizing time above ground. Movement is limited. Feeding is compressed into short windows. Travel routes are chosen not for abundance of food, but for proximity to refuge. Exposure is treated as a risk that must be exited early, not tested. What sets the desert warthog apart is not an internal adaptation, but an external dependency. Unlike many desert mammals, it does not possess efficient physiological cooling mechanisms. It cannot store significant water reserves. It does not rely fully on nocturnal behavior. Instead, it depends on something the desert rarely provides: shelter below the surface. In arid regions, shade offers almost no protection. Heat radiates upward from the ground, trapping warmth even beneath vegetation. Only underground spaces reduce temperature enough to halt physiological failure. But the desert warthog does not create these spaces. Its limbs are not adapted for deep excavation. Its body cannot sustain prolonged digging. Every refuge it uses already existed burrows abandoned by other species that reshape the soil before moving on or disappearing entirely. This dependence defines its role in the ecosystem. The desert warthog does not operate independently. Its presence is directly tied to the persistence of burrow-building animals. Where those species remain active, shelter exists. Where they decline, the warthog's survival window narrows immediately. There is no buffer period. This explains the species' fragmented distribution. Desert warthogs are not spread evenly across suitable habitat. They cluster around areas where underground refuge remains available. Their range reflects access, not opportunity. To an observer, this can make populations appear unstable, present one season, absent the next. In reality, this pattern reflects constraint. The warthog persists only where the landscape still allows retreat. It does not dominate territory. It does not expand aggressively. It survives only where the desert briefly loosens its grip. In ecosystems often defined by competition, the desert warthog survives through alignment. It fits into gaps left behind by others. It relies on structures it cannot maintain. Its endurance is borrowed, not built. This strategy allows survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. But it also means that when those borrowed structures disappear, there is nothing left to compensate. For the desert warthog, the first conflict is not pursuit. It is exposure. The moment it surfaces, the countdown begins. Heat does not threaten suddenly. It accumulates. Each minute above ground narrows the margin for recovery. Feeding requires stillness, head lowered, body fixed to soil that radiates warmth upward. What should be routine becomes costly almost immediately. Water offers no solution. In arid regions, pools appear briefly and vanish. Moisture delays collapse, but does not prevent it. The sun continues to strip heat tolerance faster than the body can compensate. By late morning, the environment becomes openly hostile. Ground temperatures burn exposed skin. Air thickens, pressing against the lungs. Breathing accelerates while oxygen uptake stagnates. Muscles fatigue early. Coordination slips. The warthog has no efficient way to shed heat. It cannot sweat effectively. It cannot pant without accelerating dehydration. It cannot rely on shade that actually insulates. The threshold between function and failure tightens. Predators are present but secondary. Lions and leopards restrict movement to narrow windows. Heat limits them too. Many hunts are abandoned because endurance fails before contact. In this landscape, predator and prey are constrained by the same force. Recovery is the difference. Predators can withdraw and wait. The desert warthog cannot recover unless it escapes the surface entirely. Without underground refuge, heat stress compounds. Reaction time slows. Awareness narrows. Once the body tips past its limit, escape is no longer possible regardless of distance. This is why retreat must occur early. The warthog cannot test its limits. Waiting for clear distress leaves no margin. Each foraging run is calculated against one question. Can retreat still restore balance? Feeding grounds are rarely adjacent to safety. Vegetation persists where conditions allow growth, not where shelter is convenient. Distance stretches risk. Every additional step increases the cost of return. Most species solve this by shaping the environment or leaving it. Burrowers dig. Migrants move. Strict nocturnal animals avoid heat almost entirely. The desert warthog does none of these completely. It does not dig. It does not migrate far. It cannot rely only on night. Instead, it navigates a fragile network of borrowed protection. Across the plains, abandoned burrows mark the line between recovery and collapse. These tunnels, cut by species adapted to excavation, offer the only reliable interruption to lethal exposure. Inside them, temperature drops, breathing steadies, and physiological balance can be restored. Access is uncertain. Burrows collapse. Entrances fill with sand. Other animals claim the space. What was safe yesterday may be gone today. The warthog cannot replace what is lost. When retreat routes fail, outcomes are immediate. Without cooler air below the surface, shade becomes meaningless. Heat reflects upward from the ground, trapping warmth. Endurance drains rapidly. Movement slows, then stops. There is no spectacle. The animal fails quietly. Predators may arrive later, but the decision was made by exposure, not pursuit. This pressure defines daily existence. Survival is measured not by confrontations avoided, but by successful returns, reaching shelter before tolerance is exceeded. Each descent resets the balance. Each return reinforces dependence. The warthog's life is shaped by availability, not control. As long as underground refuge exists, endurance remains possible. When it disappears, exposure becomes final. In the desert, failure does not require force. It requires time. It requires heat. And it requires the absence of shelter. When retreat becomes necessary, the desert warthog does not run towards safety it created. It runs toward whatever is left. As heat tightens its grip, movement shifts from routine to urgency. Breathing grows shallow. Muscles stiffen under thermal strain. The body signals that time above ground has run out. At this point, hesitation is fatal. The warthog commits. It drops low and accelerates toward the nearest known refuge. There is no pause at the entrance. The animal reverses into darkness, tusks forward, hind legs, scrambling, disappearing beneath the surface in a single motion. The transition is immediate. Above ground, heat radiates from every direction. Below, temperature drops sharply. Light vanishes. Air becomes still and dense. Within seconds, heart rate slows. Breathing steadies. The desert loosens its hold. This descent is the climax of every successful foraging cycle. Inside the burrow, the rules change. Soil insulates against surface extremes. Darkness prevents further heat absorption. For a brief window, physiological balance can be restored. Without this interruption, survival above ground would collapse within minutes. But the shelter itself is not guaranteed. The desert warthog did not build these tunnels. Its body is not adapted for deep excavation. Every refuge it uses was carved by another species. Animals capable of breaking compacted soil and sustaining underground networks. When those builders leave or disappear, the warthog inherits what remains. Inheritance comes with limits. Burrows degrade quickly. Wind pushes sand into entrances. Rain weakens ceilings. Tunnels collapse without warning. Competing animals claim space, transforming refuge into risk. A shelter remembered as reliable may vanish between days. When a warthog reaches an entrance and finds it blocked, the margin disappears. There is no time to search widely. Heat accumulation is already advanced. Energy reserves are low. The animal must locate another refuge nearby or endure exposure longer than its physiology allows. Many do not succeed. There is no chase, no struggle. The warthog slows, coordination fails, and collapse follows. Predators may arrive later, but the outcome was sealed by exposure. Even successful retreats carry cost. Burrows are confined. Air circulation is limited. Oxygen levels drop with prolonged use. Parasites accumulate. Snakes, jackals, and small carnivores enter seeking shade of their own. What protects against heat introduces new threats. Still, the calculation remains simple. Short periods underground restore function. Longer exposure above ground guarantees failure. The warthog emerges only when surface conditions briefly allow early morning, late afternoon moments when cloud cover softens the sun. Every emergence is measured. Feeding routes are chosen by proximity to shelter, not abundance of food. Movement patterns trace a mental map of known entrances. The animal does not expand territory. It navigates between remaining lifelines. This reveals the species' true adaptation. The desert warthog does not overcome its environment. It survives by exploiting the few weaknesses the desert permits: darkness, depth, insulation. These are not resources it controls. They are remnants left behind by others. As long as burrows remain scattered across the landscape, survival is possible. When the thin distance grows between exposure and recovery, each lost entrance removes an option. Each collapse tightens the corridor of tolerance. The desert does not need to pursue the warthog. It only needs to remove the places where the warthog can pause. At that point, the surface becomes decisive. Heat no longer negotiates, and survival above ground without interruption ends quickly. For the desert warthog, surviving each day does not guarantee survival as a species. Reproduction demands conditions more stable than the desert usually allows. Heat can be managed temporarily. Exposure can be escaped. But continuity, producing a new generation, depends on something far more fragile. It depends on shelter remaining available at the right moment. Birth does not occur in the open. Newborn warthogs cannot tolerate surface conditions. Their bodies absorb heat rapidly. Muscles are weak. Movement is slow and inefficient. Even brief exposure to direct sunlight can push them beyond recovery. The burrow becomes essential. Below the surface, temperature stabilizes. Darkness prevents further heat gain. Air, though limited, offers relief from constant exposure. For the first phase of life, piglets remain almost entirely underground. Without this protection, they do not survive long enough to emerge. But these burrows were not built for them. Their depth structure and airflow reflect the needs of the species that originally excavated them. Some provide adequate insulation. Others offer only partial protection. The desert warthog adapts behaviorally by timing restraint and proximity, not by modifying the environment itself. As piglets grow, they must surface. This transition is the most dangerous phase of their lives. Above-ground heat acts immediately. Young warthogs move slowly and tire quickly. They lack the awareness to retreat early and the endurance to recover from mistakes. Their survival depends entirely on how close shelter remains. Distance becomes decisive. Feeding areas must lie near the burrow. Every additional meter increases exposure. Every delay reduces the chance of return. If shelter collapses or becomes inaccessible during this stage, there is no alternative. Relocation is rarely successful. Moving piglets across open ground extends exposure time beyond safe limits. Heat accumulates. Predators detect slow movement easily. Many attempts to relocate end before a new refuge is reached. When this happens, loss leaves little evidence. Mortality occurs quietly, underground or during brief surface exposure that leaves no trace. Over time, entire local groups decline without drawing attention. Vegetation remains. Predators continue to roam. But reproduction has failed. This is how populations collapse without conflict. Adults may continue surviving for a time, navigating between remaining shelters. But without successful reproduction, numbers fall steadily. The decline is delayed, not prevented. This vulnerability is structural. The desert warthog cannot compensate when an line of shelter availability drops. It cannot dig new burrows. It cannot delay reproduction indefinitely. It cannot move long distances to find better conditions without exposing young to lethal heat. Its success is tied directly to the presence of burrow-building species. When those species decline through drought, habitat compaction, or subtle environmental change, new shelters stop appearing. Existing ones degrade. The underground network contracts. First, reproduction becomes inconsistent. Then juvenile survival drops. Finally, populations thin beyond recovery. From the surface, nothing announces this shift. The desert appears unchanged. Food may still exist. Predators may remain. But the system no longer supports continuity. This is the critical weakness of the desert warthog's strategy. It survives through dependence. That dependence works only while the environment remains structurally intact. When the underground foundation erodes, endurance above ground becomes temporary. Survival without reproduction is not persistence. It is delay. The desert warthog does not disappear because predators improve. It disappears because shelter stops renewing. Across arid regions, the animals that create deep, stable burrows begin to decline. Prolonged drought hardens soil. Vegetation thins. Excavation becomes energetically expensive. Burrow builders reduce activity first, then reproduction. New tunnels stop appearing. At first, the surface shows no change. Existing burrows remain usable. Retreat still works. Feeding routes hold. The desert warthog continues its routines, unaware that the system sustaining them has already stopped renewing. Then loss accelerates. Wind fills entrances with sand. Seasonal rains weaken ceilings. Tunnels collapse without warning. With no new burrows replacing old ones, the underground network contracts steadily. Each collapse increases distance between exposure and recovery. Distance becomes fatal. Feeding areas remain where plants can grow, not where shelter persists. Travel times lengthen. Exposure windows stretch. The warthog's behavior, shaped by generations of stable refuge, cannot adjust fast enough. Retreats that once restored balance now arrive too late. Memory fails. Entrances remembered as safe open into blocked soil. Routes that once worked end abruptly. Each failed retreat forces a decision under pressure: search, farther, endure longer, or abandon territory. All three options increase mortality. Predators exploit the consequences, but they do not cause them. Animals forced to stay above ground longer move slower. Awareness narrows. Encounters that once ended in avoidance now end in capture. Yet even without predators, heat alone is sufficient. Individuals collapse during routine foraging. Others never return from short trips. Juveniles are affected first. With fewer shelters, breeding becomes sporadic. Litters fail when entrances collapse or are occupied. Relocation attempts expose young to lethal heat. Survivorship drops sharply, even while adults persist. This creates the illusion of stability. Adults remain visible. Feeding continues, but recruitment has failed. Over time, age structure shifts. Populations thin without spectacle. Competition for remaining burrows intensifies. More aggressive species claim entrances. Snakes occupy deeper chambers. Jackals linger at openings. Shelter becomes contested space. Retreat underground no longer guarantees safety, but it remains the only option. The warthog compresses its behavior further. Activity windows narrow. Movement distances shrink. Individuals linger closer to the last reliable refuges, even as food availability declines. These adjustments delay collapse, but they cannot reverse it. The network continues to fragment. As burrows become isolated, groups cluster tightly around them. Genetic exchange declines. Local extinctions occur quietly. Vacant areas are not recolonized because no new shelter appears. There is no rapid adaptation waiting to emerge. The desert warthog does not evolve digging ability within a generation. It does not gain sufficient heat tolerance fast enough to replace underground refuge. Its strategy, effective only when the system renews, fails when renewal stops. This is the cost of dependence. What allowed the species to endure in extreme conditions also restricts its response when conditions change. Alignment becomes rigidity. Survival narrows to a single requirement that once removed cannot be replaced. From above, the desert looks unchanged. Sunrise still burns the plains. Predators still patrol. Vegetation still responds to rain when it comes. But one presence fades not through conflict, but through the gradual removal of space. The desert does not need to hunt the warthog. It only needs to stop providing places where the warthog can pause. The desert does not change when the desert warthog disappears. Heat still rises from the ground. Wind still moves across open plains. Vegetation responds to rain when it arrives. Predators continue to patrol familiar routes. From the surface, nothing appears altered, but absence reshapes the system quietly. Burrow entrances seal beneath drifting sand. Feeding grounds remain, yet no tracks return from them. Activity once concentrated around underground refuge dissolves without notice. The desert warthog does not fall in conflict. It withdraws as the conditions that once allowed pause no longer exist. There is no moment of collapse, no visible threshold, no sudden decline that demands attention. The species was never dominant. It did not reshape the land or control territory through force. Its survival depended on continuity, on underground spaces created by others and maintained without its involvement. As long as those spaces remained, life above ground was possible. When they disappeared, nothing replaced them. In this environment, survival was never built. It was inherited. Borrowed shelter beneath the soil. Borrowed relief from heat. Borrowed time between exposure and failure. This strategy worked only while the system renewed itself. When renewal stopped, endurance became delay. Adults persisted briefly. Reproduction failed quietly. Populations thinned without spectacle. The desert warthog's story is not one of weakness. It is a record of precision, of fitting exactly into the narrow margins an environment permits. It survived not by resisting the desert, but by aligning with the few weaknesses the desert allowed. When those weaknesses closed, survival ended. In extreme environments, persistence often appears invisible. It leaves little evidence while it exists, and even less when it fades. By the time absence becomes noticeable, recovery is already impossible. The desert continues unchanged. Life remains where tolerance is sufficient. It retreats where margins narrow. And it disappears where space is removed entirely. The desert warthog lived on borrowed time. When the ground beneath it could no longer offer pause, the surface reclaimed everything above it. In places that allow no forgiveness, survival is never owned. It is only permitted and always temporary.